Listening Fanfiction presents Walking with My Eyes Open by Kill the Spare, based on the anime and manga series Dr. Stone, narrated for you by Sierra Feast. Chapter 1. I didn't fall in love. Step 1. Observation and formulating a question. To begin an experiment, a researcher must first observe the phenomenon of interest in as close to its natural state as possible. Through this observation, a research question can then be formed. When Senkuu was wrenched out of sleep in his newly minted observatory by a chest-racking cough and a handful of spit-covered petals stuck to the floor, he had exactly 4 gut reactions and 1 conscious thought in specifically that order. Not totally unexpectedly, he decided to ignore the feelings for the moment in favor of the thought. Senkuu examined the petals and smiled at his first thought. This is going to be exhilarating. The Kingdom of Science didn't actually have normal days. Or maybe they did, but their normal days were just so abnormal by any other standard that no one actually knew what a normal day was. Gen had time to reflect on these things, as he for once was able to weasel himself off into the sidelines by virtue of neither being strong enough to break tungsten apart, nor having the scientific know-how to theorize how the vacuum tube could come together. In other words, he was free! Sure, a little teensy-tiny bit of token encouragements, just enough for Gen to protest. He was totally willing to pull his weight, how dare you say otherwise? And then he was off to do whatever actually he could do for free time when the entire world outside the village was rocks and trees. He resisted a grimace. He wondered when a day without back-breaking labor had somehow become synonymous with a day at the spa some 3,500 years ago. Come to think of it, he was completely blaming his utter abandonment of priorities on Senkuu and his infuriating way of making formerly tedious tasks into something almost like entertainment. Which, speaking of the man, he seemed to be almost done with his cute little science craftsman mind meld thing he did with Chrome and Kaseki, which meant if there was a time to escape, a hand hooked on the back of his collar. Gen's eyes widened. No! Come help me over here, modern man. You must know at least a little more chemistry than the villagers. No! Oh, that was just unfair. And of course his protests were completely ignored. Let this be a lesson to Gen that he should never, ever, ever procrastinate on disappearing when it came to the Kingdom of Science. Even a few seconds hesitation meant he was now getting dragged back into the lab, where he'd probably leave smelling kind of like ammonia and have a dizzying headache from all the chemical formulas that Senkuu threw at him like they were common knowledge. Like now, where Senkuu was currently explaining in apparently easy terms how they were developing the tungsten toothpaste. Gen thought there might have been something about honey, which seemed off, but once again, no. By now, Senkuu could tell him something ridiculous like he needed hair from a wild gorilla to make an ice cream machine, and Gen would just roll with it and start thinking of gorilla traps. Actually, he wondered how hard it would be to convince Senkuu that ice cream was a necessary morale booster. Senkuu had stopped talking and was looking at Gen expectantly. Fuck, how was he going to get out of this? Gen used a special move. Bullshit! Okay, I understood all of that, Senkuu-chan. Honey! Bacon and then honey. I got that much. It was super effective. Or Gen thought it was by the way Senku's stare went flat. Chrome's definitely 10 billion times more useful than you. Nah, Gen said. I don't think anyone could have kept up with that. Now a little bit of flattery thrown in. You're the only one who gets it, Senkuu-chan. Viola, a perfect excuse on why Gen really wasn't the best cut out for chemistry problems, and would be much better off wandering around the village managing possible problems. At least it would have been a perfect excuse if Senkuu didn't follow that up with a sigh, long and almost resigned, and really not much like their resident village chief at all. Gen's mentalist senses suddenly pinged hard. Whatever, Senkuu said. I didn't really call you to help on the tungsten paste, other than to hold some beakers and hand me the chemicals. Oh, Gen perked up. Then why am I here, Senkuu-chan? New experiments. Senkuu glanced outside the lab briefly, as if checking the others were still far enough away, working on the light bulbs. I need you to be my research partner, though honestly that's probably overstating your role a bit. I'm flattered that you're finally appreciating my brilliance, Senkuu-chan. Gan raised a brow. But don't you normally go to Chrome for the science things? Senkuu was already laying out chemicals for the stone paste thing, only halfway looking up. Yeah, and I definitely prefer Chrome for this too, but unfortunately, it looks like this one has to be you if I'm going to get any real work done. He paused, grimacing. Plus, I'd rather the village not find out about this one. At least not until it's done. Ooh, and a secret experiment too. One that even had Senkuu a little hesitant. Never mind, it looks like today the lab was the most interesting place Gan could be. He hopped up on the lab table, ignoring the mild glare Senkuu sent at him for doing it. Don't worry, Senkuu-chan. I'm very, very good at being discreet. You can tell me anything. My lips are completely sealed. He even mimed zipping his mouth to top off the performance. Senkuu was already looking like he regretted this. So, Gan pressed, what's this ultra-big sciencey secret that needs my help specifically? Senkuu rolled his eyes, taking a single breath, and... I'm dying, Senkuu said in the same tone he used for minor inconveniences. Gan froze. No, froze wasn't entirely accurate, because he could suddenly hear his heart beating painfully in his chest, twice the rate it was supposed to. He could feel his face going pale and his skin cold. He thought he might be sick. You're what? Gen croaked out, and for half a second he thought maybe it was a joke or Senkuu being overly dramatic. But Senku's dramatics should be insane scientific discoveries and not this. How? Why? Senkuu looked infuriatingly calm as ever. You can relax, mentalist. I said dying. Not that I'm going to die. His expression twitched, rubbing at his chest. Quit looking like that. I already have a plan worked out. Trust me, I don't have a millimeter's worth of interest in dying before we even get to that really exciting stuff. Gen felt like he could breathe again. He told himself it was because Senkuu was Senkuu, and without him the entire kingdom of silence was basically screwed. Not to mention the rest of the world. Gen was a very selfish man. After all, he liked things like cotton candy and cola and not dying from pneumonia, none of which would be likely if Senkuu kicked the bucket before they even finished cell phones. But Senkuu had a plan, and historically Senku's plans had a pretty high success rate of coming true no matter how improbable they sounded. The effect was double when the plan involved science. Gen took a breath, steadying himself. So, how are you dying? Hanahaki disease, Senkuu answered casually. Gen nearly fell off the lab table. Ah! Did Senku just say... Did Senkuu just say that... Hanahaki disease, Senkuu repeated before shrugging. Also known as the flower sickness, rare but most often originating in East Asian regions like... I know what it is! Gen interrupted. That's supposed to be a myth! Senkuu snorted, hardly. Though I suppose that's fair. It was more found in folklore in the past half a century, or well, 3,600 centuries now. But the first medically documented case was in 2009. He tapped his finger along a beaker. Admittedly, it's still one of the rarest diseases documented. Even in our era, doctors still didn't know much about its causes or development. No one's even found a full-fledged cure yet or a treatment that didn't involve invasive surgery. Then Senkuu smirked because Senkuu was insane. Just think, mentalist. We're going to use our stone world to make a groundbreaking medical discovery that even our experts couldn't figure out. Sometimes Gen reflected conversations with Senkuu were the verbal equivalent of going for a nice stroll and falling down a cliff, followed by losing gravity. Then you'd just be floating along being hit by rocks and junk, wondering what the fuck even happened and how you were supposed to get back to solid ground. Yes, I'm very excited for you, Gen managed dryly. Well, I get you the telescope and apparently we could have just given you a deadly disease for your birthday. Congratulations! I liked the telescope, too, Senkuu threw in. Fantastic! What? Teensy tiny question? Gen held up a finger. What happens on the off chance we can't figure it out and you die horrifically from something out of a fairy tale? Senkuu picked at his ear, not looking concerned. Fairy tale or not, he said, all fantasy has to have a scientific base. If we find out the underlying rules of this disease, we should be able to hypothesize a cure. It should even work out on our timeline. He smirked. Based on the reports, the average span of terminal Hanahaki disease takes 2 to 3 months. We'll have an answer one way or another by the time spring gets here and the village has to deal with Tsukasa. Gen was going to strangle him one day, he swore it. Senkuu at least seemed to notice Gen's lack of staggeringly idiotic confidence. The smirk faded, tone going completely serious. We'll figure this out, mentalist. I'm 10 billion% sure of it. Gen sighed. He gave in to tilting his head back and closing his eyes just for a short handful of seconds. Okay. Senkuu was right. They could do this. Compared from freeing the entire world from stone, this was even comparatively easy. Senkuu currently knew more about medicine than anyone in the world, and Gen was an expert in psychology. If anyone could figure out a love disease, it was them. Uppies clicked together. Oh! Gen moved back forward, regaining himself and sliding right into teasing. And now I see why you just had to have me as your research partner. Senkuu-chan? Senkuu shrugged. Well, yeah, I figured it was obvious. Gen clapped his hands together. Oh, absolutely. Who better to know about wooing someone than a mentalist? Don't worry, Senkuu-chan, whoever you're pining over, I can get them falling over their feet in no time. Gen's face split open in a grin. Really, I'd be happy to, even without the whole dying thing. This is the most interesting task I've had in weeks, minus the whole preparing for war thing. Senkuu frowned. Mentalist. Now, first things first, Gen said. Tell me who the lucky lovebird to be is. Senkuu looked at him like he was an idiot. Gen decided to ignore that. Come on, Senkuu-chan, no need to be shy. I'm going to have to find out anyway if you want my help. He tapped his chin. Or would it be easier if I guessed? Sure, Senkuu said flatly. Guess. Well, Gen leaned back and thought. I guess the most obvious choice would be Kohaku. Obvious. Kohaku. But apparently not. Gen continued. Okay, and the rest get more tricky. You came to me first rather than them. Now, normally you're a fairly straightforward person, so I guess you'd go to them to start, but here you wanted my advice first, so there must be some kind of problem. So, who is it? He snuck a glance at Senkuu, who was pinching his nose and glaring up at the ceiling like it was the source of all his problems. Oh, Gen realized. It's Chrome, isn't it? You're worried because of his thing with Rory. Senku's head shot back down. What? No worries. That childhood crush has years without results, so I think you still have a chance. It's not Chrome, Senkuu interrupted. Gen frowned. Then is it Rory, the ex-wife, the good... No! Gen gasped. Chrome and Rory, ambitious Senkuu-chan, but I regret every second of this conversation. Okay, so not them. Gen tried a different track. Kaiju? Gross. Yuzore ah? Seriously, mentalist? Kiro? No, you're just fishing. Well, excuse me, I'm kind of running out of options here. Gen whined. He went down his list of all possible candidates, crossing out names one by one before his eyes widened. Oh no! Finally! Senkuu threw his hands up. Gen nodded miserably. It's Tsukasa, isn't it? Senkuu stared at him. Shit, it totally is. Gen groaned. What a disaster. No, Senkuu said with prejudice. But you know what? I fucking wish it was Tsukasa right now. At least he has a brain. Oh. The various worst-case scenario plans Gen was already making were summarily thrown in the mental dumpster. Then who is it? Gen asked, finally giving it up. Wait, do you even know who it is? Senkuu rolled his eyes. Yeah, it was absolutely clear when I saw the flower. Hanahaki disease is reported to always be the flower the patient associates with the person they're in love with. Though I have my doubts on whether that's actually... So was the flower. Gen cut him off before the rant got into science, and Gen never figured out who Senkuu was apparently in love with. Senkuu huffed like he always did when he got derailed from science, but obligingly reached for his belt and drew out a folded piece of cloth, handing it over to Gen. Gen unwrapped it. 5 black nightshade laid in his hand. Gen stared at them. Abstractly, Gen realized he might have been staring at them for a really long time, as there was the unmistakable sound of Senkuu getting back to work in the background. Black nightshade, Gen said, still looking at the petals like they might change shape. So, it's me. You're in love with me. Enough to vomit flowers, apparently, was Senkei's blasé response, not even looking up from measuring chemicals. The world tilted on its axis again. Wait! Gen finally pulled his eyes away. Is this a confession? Senkuu paused, long enough to show he was considering the question. A gesture to reveal feelings, specifically of a romantic nature. He nodded, satisfied, before turning back to his chemicals. Yeah, I suppose it is in a technical sense. I was more thinking of it as a research proposal. Gen held back a groan. A research proposal. Honestly, how very like Senkuu. Then the bigger problem hit. But I don't feel the same way, Gen said before he could even think of lying. Actually, before this morning, he'd kind of assumed Senkuu was asexual. He was absolutely certain that he'd never considered Senkuu in a romantic light, especially not for himself, which was a problem. Anyone else, and Gen was confident in his abilities to, at the very least, make a very good effort at wooing them over to Senku's side. To a very basic level, he was pretty sure he could spark some interest, maybe enough to hold off Hanahaki disease until Senkuu developed a cure. It didn't work that way when he was wooing himself. That meant the timeline was very, very real, and Senkuu could actually die, and all because he'd made the ill-advised mistake of falling for Gen, who probably just broke his heart. Oh, fuck. Had he just broken Senku's heart? Was that even possible? He should have just lied, or... A cough. Oi, mentalist, whatever you're working yourself up about, stop. Gen jerked out of his thoughts. Senkuu was staring at him, not looking particularly heartbroken at all, actually. I know. I'm perfectly aware that you're not in love with me. I figured that out before I even decided to tell you. He smirked. Wouldn't it be much of an experiment if you cured it right on the first date, would it? Gen gaped at him, once again thrown into the disorienting experience that was talking to Senkuu. Then why am I here? Gen asked. I told you. As a research partner, Senkuu repeated. We're basically working with a blank slate right now when it comes to what we know about the disease. Does it have to be love? What kind of love? How is that translated to brain activity? Where is the plant even growing and how? What kind of response slows the progression? Can it even be slowed significantly? He started counting off. There's blood pressure monitoring, heart rate measure, proxemics, hormone release, biological susceptibility, a billion different variables, and I can only study half of them without you here to show how your influence affects the results. Senkuu grinned. I told you, mentalist, we're going to study this step by step until we find some answers. And the first step? Observation. Gen didn't fall asleep that night. It was only partly because whatever method the villagers had thought up to melt tungsten apparently involved frequent explosions and suspicious flashes of light. It also wasn't entirely because Senkuu called him up to act as an assistant. Despite his own behavior, Senkuu actually did let other people keep regular sleep schedules on occasion. No, as Gen mimicked sleep under a pile of blankets at the corner of the lab, he stayed awake thinking. Gen was not a scientist in the same way Senkuu was, but he had always prided himself as methodical. He laid out the facts. Fact 1. Gen wasn't a stranger to confessions, even ones that appeared out of the blue. He had been a celebrity back in his former life. He knew he had a pretty face, and knew how to draw out his words in a mix of teasing and flirting. He used to date plenty of people casually, had even gotten a few declarations of love, not that he'd ever believed them. The point was, Gen knew how to feign attraction well enough that no one had ever doubted it. Fact 2. The Kingdom of Signs was going to war with the Empire of Might just as soon as the snow started to fall. Wars were never pleasant things, despite all of Senku's plans on making it bloodless. There were always hundreds of ways everything could go wrong, even if just a single detail was missed. They needed everyone at the best, most of all their leader. Fact 3. Even if he'd only thought of it as an internet myth before today, what Gen did know, what Senkuu had already confirmed, was that Hanahaki disease was a vicious, painful disease where the victim's own body tried to tear itself apart from the inside, brutal to even live with and deadly if not cured. In 3 months at most, Senkuu would die painfully unless they found some kind of miracle cure. Fact 4. None of this would last without Senkuu. That didn't even bear expounding on, really. Everything. The Kingdom of Science, the dreams of depetrification, all of that relied on a single person's continued survival. Fact 5. Despite that, Gen had noticed Senkuu had a disturbing lack of dramatics when it came to his own mortality. It wasn't even a lack of care, per se. Senkuu always seemed exactly as cautious with his own life as he was with everybody else's. But that was the problem, because Senkuu wasn't everybody else, and sometimes Gen wanted to take his also noble save everybody perspective and beat him over the head with it. Because there had to be more to it than that. It was normal for people to prioritize their own lives. And Gen still had a list of questions on how exactly Senkuu had gotten Tsukasa to believe he killed him. And unfortunately, he never quite gotten Taiju or Yozuri had to talk. Anyway, final point, Senkuu could be selfless to the point of fault, especially if that meant advancing science. 5 facts. 1 conclusion. Gen wasn't going to risk Senku's life to wait and see if the scientists could develop a cure. Gen was going to save himself, using the one surefire way they knew could cure Hanahaki disease. Gen opened his eyes to slits as he carefully watched Senkuu move his way around the lab. He started to plan. Gen was going to convince Senkuu that he was in love with him if it was the last thing he ever did. For a plan that was entirely dedicated to Senku's feelings, Gen had actually forgotten to account Senkuu himself. The plan went like this. An abrupt, direct confession wasn't Gen's preferred method. He'd rather give it time. Time meant subtle. A few lingering looks, touches that weren't entirely necessary, words that danced and led until the person who heard them followed behind. Conveniently, Gen would make a plan for months. But unfortunately, Gen didn't have that time for the same reason he couldn't wait around for a cure. Which meant the alternative, a sudden realization. The only problem there was that Gen had already shot himself in the foot with stupid honesty. Looking back, he should have just told Senkuu yesterday that his feelings were returned. But no, Gen had to be in a state of shock where he's stupidly blurted out his true feelings, or lack thereof. And now he was stuck working overtime to not only find the perfect way to tell Senkuu he loved him too, but also come up with a plausible reason on why he denied it yesterday. Here was his idea, and it looked like the cards were already playing out in his favor, because luckily the benefit of not sleeping the entire night was that Gen already looked like a mess, and for once didn't do any of his normal routine to try to hide it. As a bonus, Old Man Kasuki had also worked him half to death to make the insane Hickman glass thing. This, in turn, had downgraded Gen's appearance from mess to outright train wreck. Last, while Gen had been tortured via Hickman bump, Senkuu had apparently decided that indoor heating was a thing the village absolutely needed, and had summarily sent most of the others out to collect coal. The results meant that by night, him and Senkuu were entirely alone for the evening, and Gen looked like a man who had been put through the emotional ringer and had somehow come through on the other side enlightened. It was perfect. Gen could wax poetically about how, after he'd gotten through the shock and denial of hearing that Senkuu loved him, was absolutely wrecked by the mere thought that he might die, and in his agony realized that he couldn't live without Senkuu by his side. Perfect. If Gen wasn't already a novelist for psychology tidbits, he definitely had a future in the romance trade. There was admittedly the tiny worry of after. Gen had no idea how long he should keep this up. Would they be dating after this, or whatever the stone world equivalent was? Is he like it? What would happen if they broke up? Would the disease come back? Would Gen be keeping up alive forever? Terrifyingly, Gen thought he would, if he had to. He never had the strongest grasp on ethics, and for once he was glad. But he also knew what it meant to lie. Lies had costs, always, and lies didn't always strike a fair bargain. Sometimes they never told you their cost until after you'd already sold it. Gen had paid before. He could never go back to the Empire of Might without them killing him as a spy. He'd lied with a fistful of flowers to Magma and nearly been stabbed through the chest. Lies cost, and they cost, and they cost, until there could be no poorer person than a liar that had run out of truths. If Senkuu ever found out Gen lied about this, be it weeks, months, or years, get it and pretend there was a future he wouldn't hate him for it. Gen took a breath and approached the lab anyway. A pity, really, what it cost to save Senku's life. Then again, Gen had always been fonder of him than was probably wise. He paused outside of the lab, pinching his cheeks to a flush and getting ready for a performance of a lifetime. By the time Gen pushed back the lab curtain, he'd already managed to tremble to his hands and an expression tinged with desperation. "Senkuu! I need to talk to you!" Senkuu looked up, took one look at Gen, and then snorted. The old man really worked you to the bone, didn't he? Gen ignored that, stumbling forward into the lab and grabbing Senku's hands, mentally applauding himself on the way the man's eyes widened, and there was a quick intake of breath. Oh, Gen definitely had this. "I need to talk to you," Gen repeated, both breathless and emphatic. "Please, Senkuu-chan, just hear me out for a few moments. There's something I have to say." Senkuu cleared his throat, glancing down at their hands before back again. "Okay. What's up?" He squinted at Gen's appearance. "Is there something, wrong with you?" Gen laughed. "You know, I think there might be. I think I might have been an idiot, possibly for a long time now." He stepped closer, hands still gripped between them. "Yesterday when you first told me you were sick, I didn't want to believe it. No, I couldn't believe it, because if what you were saying was true, it meant you were dying because of me." Senkuu frowned. "Please, Senkuu-chan, let me finish," Gen said, cutting him off. "That's what I thought at first, and I thought that's why I was so upset. I felt like I couldn't even think, but then, even when you said we'd find a cure together, Gen laughed wetly, letting a tear fall down his cheek and not bothering to catch it. He risked a glance up at Senkuu and saw that the scientist had started staring at him intently. "Sorry, I know I probably seem like a mess right now." Gen looked down bashfully. "I am a mess, honestly. I couldn't sleep all night. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, and then what I said, and what this could all mean if we let it. And a sigh. I realized that the thing that was hurting me so much wasn't that you were dying because of me. It was just that I could lose you. I don't think I could do any of this without you." Gen whispered, head still tilted down. "Actually, I know I can't because what I'm trying to say is..." Gen blinked away the tears, looking up to meet Senku's strange red eyes. "I love you, Senkuu-chan," Gen finished. Senku's lips parted. Gen smiled, nodding to encourage Senkuu to speak. He knew he should have gotten into acting back when they still had things like movies. "Yes, Senkuu-chan?" Gen urged gently. "Gen, Senkuu shook his head. "Literally, I have no idea how you thought that would work." Gen's smile froze. Senkuu snorted, dropping his hands like they were toxic. "Seriously, it's been a day. How dumb do you think I am to believe the sudden realization play? At least give it a week. Then maybe you wouldn't look like you got run over by a truck." Fucking Senkuu! Who was going to die a fucking load because he didn't think the help Gen was also genuinely offering? "Senkuu?" Gen's breath hitched. I'm being serious here. I know it's hard to believe. It's 10 billion% unlikely. But I do love you." He wiped out his eyes. "Please, Please believe me, I don't want to watch you die. Senkuu just grinned at him. Though I guess it fits that you'd try for the easy way to get out of the real work. Gen dropped the egg. Oh, fuck off! I spent all day working on your stupid Hickman pump. I've bled for this place. Give up for easy work, my ass! Oh, good. You're back to normal. Senkuu leaned back on the table. When you first came in, I was actually getting worried, Mentalist. What cheap romance novel you pull that monologue from? Gen flipped him off. It was interesting, though, Senkuu said, grabbing for his notes. Even hearing a verbal response of reciprocation had no effect on the illness. I have to believe the feelings are reciprocated too, apparently. Interesting. That means there must be some kind of cognitive element to it. Good work, Mentalist. We have our first lead. I hate you, Gen grumbled. Senkuu cackled, scribbling another note. Also, no effects. This disease really is exhilarating. Gen glared for all the good it did him. Senkuu gave him a once-over. Get some sleep, you'll need it. Meet me here tomorrow after sunup. Tomorrow, we start the real research progress. Begrudgingly, Gen trudged back to his usual hut and collapsed back on the cot. Fine! So, the first attempt was obviously a bust. No matter what kind of strategist would Gen be if he didn't have more plans up his sleeve. Tomorrow, he'd start his second plan. Make Senkuu fall out of love. How hard could it possibly be?